I'm recording.
So yeah, this is going to be somewhat advanced for some people, but the kind of the precursor to this was for me to basically give you the tools so that you can make your own decisions. I don't want to tell you what to do with your rig or your setup, because that's what we're going to kind of go over. I just want to give you the tools so that way you can make your own decisions and kind of figure some things out on your own as we go. So like I said, it's going to be a little bit too much to digest, but you can go back and watch this again. I tried to keep it somewhat simple, so that way you can go back and not be confused if you do go back and watch it without, saying anything. So just to give you a little bit of a background, that's me there. I grew up sailing in Southern California. I worked at Ullman Sales there for a number of years. As a matter of fact, built the first sails for the Ultimate 20 when the Canepas were in charge of that deal. Jay and Peasy Glazier had a really good relationship with them, and so we were the first ones to build sails. And a funny story, just real quick, over this was a brochure for the U20s back in the day. I remember hand working this spinnaker myself, actually, on the floor, and it was an orange sail. And we didn't build many orange sails back in the day, so it definitely kind of stood out. And I remember, like, why in the world did they want to do this? Well, they were pretty smart. They figured out that it would photograph red. But this sail, believe it or not, was like literally almost pumpkin orange. But they were smart enough to know that it was going to photograph really nicely. And sure enough, it did. And that's the original photo of the boat blasting off. So yeah, I was there from day one, basically. Jay and Peasy left and went on to go do their own thing. But obviously Ullman still makes a lot of the sails from back in the day. I've been around forever. I kind of laid off of sailing a little bit to go car racing, which brought me to North Carolina from Southern California. But in hindsight, I decided to stick with what you know, and so now I'm back sailing again, almost full time, but not quite. My reign in the U20s has been pretty short lived. I only started sailing with Tim Porter in 2017 when we took his boat Mighty Mouse to Kansas, to Lake Perry there. Had a really fun regatta. That was a great regatta. Those of you who were there know it was nice and breezy, good event. And then the following year in 2018, we were fortunate enough to win the Nationals here on Lake Norman. Kind of a lighter air venue, but we were still able to put together the scorecard. So real quick, just the basics of sailing. You gotta keep these in mind every time you get on the boat, right? Sailing it's the process of opposite forces reacting together. So you guys have to remember what the foils are doing underneath the boat and what the sails, more importantly, are doing above the boat. You have to try to make all of this as efficient as possible, because both of them are producing drag. And so you want to eliminate as much drag as you can to get as most efficiency as you can. So the sails and the boards are what's doing all the work. So we have to do it right. Real quick, just kind of a, little generic fleet picture here. This is on Lake Norman, of course. Some of the things we're going to talk about is obviously the rig and the sails and how they all interrelate. I just have here highlighted Boom Bang. This is John's boat here, 203. Sailing around, you can see kind of slight overbend wrinkles, which was actually one of his questions, I believe, was how to get his sail to have slight overbend wrinkles. Well, there you go, John. You actually have them. Yeah, that's as flat as your main can go without being inside out. Mark Asplin here, sailing with a little bit more bend down low. So he's got a lot more of these overbend wrinkles, which radiate from the clew out to the mast, where it's being bent and pulling all the luff curve out of the sail. And then in the medium, or in the middle here, we have John Butine with the carbon rig. It's not much, surprisingly, and I'm going to show you this later, but it is a stiffer section. It has similar characteristics, but not totally. But here you can see these are all three the same sails, but obviously all trimmed slightly differently. So
Is 173 with a Forte mast, or is it with
that's a
a
C-Tech.
C-Tech? Okay.
Yep, I
Thank
believe
you.
it's a C-Tech, from what I know. So same thing here, just kind of dissecting a little bit of this. Here we have the both boats going upwind, opposite tacks, obviously. 88 Mark here. He's sheeted very tightly. Boom bangs on pretty hard. That's what's pushing the boom forward and causing the lower portion of the rig to bend so much. And that's indicated by the overbend wrinkles here coming out of the clew. Obviously, the outhaul's on pretty tight here. So that's making the bottom of the sail even flatter. Something to keep in mind. Whereas John over here, you can tell his outhaul is off. So the bottom of his sail is probably substantially fuller. And if you notice, it doesn't have quite as many of the overbend wrinkles. So you it may be sheeted hard and pushing the mast forward, but with the outhaul off, it kind of made up for it a little bit. And everything's give and take. Head sail trim, kind of vice versa. So here, John has the leech cheated pretty hard, but you can tell there's a lot of headstay sag. And we're going to talk a lot about this over the course of the next hour, half hour, is headstay sag and how to control that. Mark, you can see here, the headstay's taut, and the leech on the jib is more open. Granted, the sheeting and stuff has a lot to do with that. However, we're going to go through the tools on what we can do. All right, so this is the first one that I really want to drill into you guys. The U20 is very unique in this sense. Obviously, no backstay. A lot of rake in the spreaders. So we have to do it all with rig tension, right? That's our biggest tuning tool. And I'm gonna, oops, okay. I'm gonna kind of go over this quickly, and then I know you guys are gonna have questions about this. So here you can tell this mast is relatively straight, all things considered. This is somewhat to scale, but not really. You can tell here with it being straight where the hounds are. Okay, the hounds are where the headstay and the shrouds all come together, correct? So that is vitally important in terms of where it is located over the boat, over the deck, or over the mast step. So the shroud base is fairly far aft. The hounds are in between, obviously, the mast butt and where the shrouds attach. So there's one thing that I really want to drill into you guys is that anytime the mast bends, this dimension from the hounds to the deck gets shorter. There's no way we can change that. Okay. So anytime this dimension actually loses vertical dimension, this gets shorter. Okay. So what that does by lowering the hounds is it makes the headstay softer. Okay. So even though we pull back on the shrouds and we can wind on to 30 plus, we think that we're pulling the headstay tight, which we are, but to a certain degree, we're actually lowering the hounds, which also is shortening this dimension, which is softening the headstay. It's kind of counterintuitive, but again, you got to realize that we don't have a backstay to do this with, okay? So to remedy that, and we figured this out in 2017 sailing in Kansas, I went off the tuning guide for our sails and things weren't right. And so I just started doing what I know and it started getting better and better and better. And sure enough, we got better and better and faster and faster. And what I did was I just started pulling on the lowers. So I knew my uppers were in a fairly good spot. I just started pulling on my lowers to keep control of the middle of the mast. Okay. Because here you can see tighter lowers help straighten the mast. When the mast straightens, it pushes the hounds up, which effectively makes the headstay tighter. Okay. So a couple of things to look for is you'll have a smaller split in the rig tension. I know I've been sailing on boats, and you'll see here in a second. I've sailed on boats with shrouds at 30 and 6. 30 on the uppers and 6 on the lowers, because somebody was trying to get mass bend. But in all actuality, it was kind of not working out that way. So I have it down here, main sheet bridle. I'm gonna explain this in greater detail later. Mass bends and lowers. So with this, with the hounds coming down, not only are we lowering the head stay in relation to the deck, but we're also lowering the shrouds in relation to the deck. So on traditional boats, when we tighten the uppers and we pull the backstay on, what happens? The uppers usually go softer. Well, why is that? That's because we lowered the hounds to the deck. Okay, so these are some things that not everybody thinks about all the time. So if you have tight uppers with loose lowers, you're going to get a lot of pre-bend or a lot of mast bend. And that's what's causing some of those overbend wrinkles in those pictures that we looked at. Main sheet bridle, I'll explain that in a second. Identified by the overbend wrinkles. We saw that on a couple of the other sails, 203 and 88, right? The other thing it does is it closes the slot between the main and the jib. Look what happened right here when we push this mast forward. Look at this dimension. If the jib were up here, what did that do? It just got smaller, right? Look over here. If you were to draw a line, this line would be longer than this line right here. So what we did is we just closed the slot between the main and the jib. So now if you have the jib sheeted really hard and the mast bent a whole bunch, you just close the slot. And so what happened is there's a multitude of factors. If we made the head stay softer, well, we just allowed the jib to rotate to leeward, making it even closer in the slot. So I'm going to show you a couple pictures here in a second, but just really major things to keep in mind. And I know probably a lot of you haven't really thought of it this way. So hopefully you'll go back and you'll look and you'll realize the importance of this. I'm going to save that main sheet bridle. I'm going to get to it here in a second because I learned something really interesting just last week going out with Tim Porter. So mainsail controls. Here we have a couple different sails. These are actually both off of my boat. These are the sails that I got with the boat, and won a couple of regattas with them when I first got it, and then I got new sails. So I'll show you both, just to be fair and equal. The biggest tools you have are shroud tension, obviously, right? 2 to 3 complete rotations, kind of equal around a step at a time. Some people will go on 3 and 1.5. Some will go on maybe 5 and 3. It's rare that you go on even turns, 3 and 3 or 2 and 2, but you can. Batten tension. So we all have, 3 full battens, right? We want to make sure that we have proper tension on them, just enough to take a slight wrinkle out of the pocket, but we don't want them so much compressed that they cause a scallop, if you will, on the top and bottom, almost like an eyebrow above the batten pocket. You don't want it that tight. You want it just enough to, when you're sailing, remove whatever wrinkles might be in the pocket. I see it a lot of the times, and a lot of the Velcro sometimes softens up. People don't adjust them a lot. A lot of the newer battens have the rocket tensioners. So, the older the sail gets, if you haven't touched them in a while, maybe just put a full turn on one of the rocket adjusters, or unseat your Velcro pockets and reseat them, just as a kind of a general rule of thumb. Main sheet tension obviously is a big one. You can pull it on for if you want the leech to close down, get some point maybe on a, for a section. You can open the leech up by going off on the main sheet. It's gonna let the boom lift, let the whole sail lift a little bit, kind of get that leech open a little bit, a little bit more drag racy, so to speak. You can see here on this sail up top, it looks pretty open, right? I've drawn this line here. You can see how open it is. This is the long full batten. So it's somewhat undersheeted, but yet the top telltale is still stalled, if you can see it right here. So we don't really want to go on too much more because we're still stalled. We want to wait for this to start flying a little bit more before we kind of sheet on anymore. Otherwise, we're going to stall the next one down, and then we're going to start hurting ourselves a little bit. Obviously, I was soft on Cunningham here in this picture, but I am trying to get the draft to move aft, which I know a lot of people talk about. There are a couple different things. Obviously, this is not the way that this sail was meant to be. I made my own battens for this sail, and so that's why it has a more draft aft shape to it and not a real knuckle forward design. You can see down here, this sail, the leech is quite a bit tighter, and yet the tailtails are flowing. They're harder to see here, but the tailtails are flowing, getting good flow over this. Obviously the leech tension is vitally important to control your head stay. We kind of looked at that because we don't have a backstay, right? And we're going to get into that a little bit more with the Traveler, which comes up in a lot of questions. So one thing with the Traveler is in breeze, everybody has a different idea. I can tell you what I do. Everybody else can tell you what they do, and you're going to get 4 or 5 different answers. The one thing I want you to keep in mind, though, is that when you drop the Traveler past center, okay, so if you have your main sheet locked off, if you drop it past center, it's essentially pulling your main sheet in for you, okay? It's slight, but it does do that. It's not an even, because we have the main sheet block mounted in the middle of the boat. So the same thing, as soon as we start pushing that lead away, it essentially is pulling the main in, which is not necessarily bad. I like it personally because I do a quick Traveler drop in a puff to similar to like a flap on a wing. And if anybody watched the AC stuff, how fast they were moving those wing sails. This is not an AC boat by any means. However, you can treat it somewhat the same with the leech of the sail. And so immediately dropping the Traveler just lets that flap kind of release a little bit without losing my backwards tension or my sheet tension, if you will. And if anything, like I said here, it actually slightly helps it. So if that's the case and you drop it past center, you've spilled some air out of the sail, and yet you've tightened the leech ever so slightly, which translates to the masthead, to the hounds, which maybe pulled the head stay slightly tighter, which pulled the jib forward, opening the leech of the jib, all things that you want to have happen in a puff. In a perfect world, that's great, but that's what I like. That's kind of what I've become accustomed to, if you will. The outhaul is going to help your shape of the sail in the very bottom. But one thing to keep in mind is that it also affects the leech up high. So if you have a tight outhaul, you're going to get a flat shape in the bottom third of your sail, but it also helps open the leech ever so slightly, okay? A loose outhaul, conversely, if you fill this sail up and you let this be real bulbous, it's going to take this leech and pull it to weather. It's going to tighten the leech. So a couple of things you just got to keep in mind. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I just want you to tell you what's going to happen when you do it, okay? A couple more things real quick. Boom vang, a very important tool on this boat. However, if you haven't caught my drift already, I think overly used. And I could go on for hours as to why this is, but it controls the amount of twist in the leech of the mainsail. And you can use it to induce mast bend. So if we want to flatten a sail out, we can pull some boom vang on. And I'm going to show you a video here in a second of what happens. I ran across it this past week. Cunningham, kind of your last ditch effort. But one thing to keep in mind, that when you do pull it on, it does pull the draft forward. We all know that. Okay, that's okay. But one thing to keep in mind is that if you pull this Cunningham on and you pull all this sail shape forward, right, we're going to pull the draft forward. As soon as we pull this sail shape forward, here, here, and here, that's going to take this and straighten it. It's going to take it to the leech and straighten it, which slightly opens it, okay? So just, again, things to keep in mind. You know what? Okay, hold on one second. Okay, so check this out. I'm going to, You're all still with me, right?
Still with
No? You're with me, okay. Did everybody mute me already?
Does anyone have any questions at this point, or?
And wait till it gets to the main sheet bridle.
Yeah,
Okay.
that was, I wanted to see that too.
Okay, good. So I've piqued your interest. Okay, so I ran across this video last week. Can you guys see it right now? Are you still seeing my screen?
Still see slides.
Yes, Steve.
It's
You
your
see-
PowerPoint.
Do you see YouTube?
No,
You don't. Okay.
No
That's-
YouTube yet.
Okay, that's not going to work. All right. Well,
but you might need it instead of sharing just the program,
Yeah, share a
the
different
screen.
okay. So that's not going to work. I'll send everybody a link to it. It's going to back up what I've said. You're back on my screen now, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I will send you guys a link. It's a clever group that has incorporated load cells into some testing, and they started doing it on the J70. Some of you may have seen this already or not, but it's really, there's at 4 minutes and 45 seconds of the video. It's informational, yes. They're trying to sell something, obviously, but there's a really good piece in there right at 4:45 or right around 5 minutes, where they put the load cell on the head stay of a J70, and they put a load cell in the main sheet of the J70. And what they've done is they've shown us real time, live, what happens to the head stay when you pull the boom vang on, and what happens to the head stay when you pull the main sheet on. And it'll blow you away how the numbers change. You pull the boom vang on, the head stay goes soft, exactly for the reasons that I'm sharing right here, right? You pull the boom vang on, you push this boom forward, you bend the bottom of the mast. They have a load cell right here, and it goes down 30, 40 pounds by pulling just the boom vang on and leaving the main sheet, okay? So then they let the boom vang back off, they pull just the main sheet on. Well, the main sheet translates to up here, okay? Which then translates to the hound, so it's much closer, and the head stay tension goes up. So in breeze, pulling on the boom vang is kind of a normal thing for us, but you got to realize that we don't have a backstay, so we have to be very, very careful when we do that. And you need to understand what it's doing when you do it, okay? So we'll continue on with the main sheet here. Okay, I talked about going sailing last week with Tim Porter on his boat real quick. This is the same sail. These two pictures are taken actually 40 seconds apart from each other, a minute apart from each other on opposite tacks, obviously. And the difference in these two sail shapes, this was first and this was second. So we were sailing and we're like, gosh, why is the rig look like this? It shouldn't, it normally looks much better than this. And I noticed that his boat, this is his boat right here. This was when we got back to the dock, I took a picture. So there's two boom bales, right? On the booms. It doesn't say which one you have to use. It says you can use either of them. And it says you can have a strop anywhere you want in between. Class rules, that is. And so what I've done is I made myself this bridle connected to both bales. This is the aft, this is the forward, with what I call a Chinese finger splice. And so what I can do is I can take my fiddle block now for my main sheet, and I can move the lead of my main sheet where it comes off the traveler, right? I can move it forward off of one, or I can move it aft off of the other, okay? So Tim's boat didn't have this set up yet. And so what I did is I took his aft bridle, just disconnected it entirely, moved it to the forward bale so that both main sheet pulleys were pulling off the same bale, just slightly forward of the traveler, right? So now when you pull the main sheet in, it's going to slightly just pull aft on that, or it's certainly just not going to push forward on it. That is the only difference in these two pictures, just so you know, okay? So this sail originally, you can see how the draft just kind of coming off of it, you're pretty shallow, not real powerful. So literally by taking that main sheet apart and just switching it so that I wasn't pushing the boom forward, I got this nice, round, even sail shape by only making just that change right there. Okay.
So Steve, the original design of the boat
Mm-hmm.
was having a block on each of those bales.
Yep.
There was no little harness that went down between the two of them.
Correct.
Now, I'm a larger person.
Mhm.
And so I put a double block on the forward bale.
Mhm.
I didn't put any extension or anything, allows me a little more room to tack, but I'm definitely getting more of a sail shape that looks like your top one than the bottom.
Right. And this is a much better looking sail shape than this one. And that's the only change. And so what I'm doing is I'm actually changing this in between races, depending on what I want. For instance, if it's choppy and light, or I can put it forward so I can have a nice full sail. If we have decent flat water, then I'll go ahead and I'll maybe move it aft a little bit, so that way I can flatten my sail out and not have as much drag built into the sail, because I don't need the power if it's flat water, and just use my drag race mode. So I'm telling you guys, this is a game changer right here. I can't emphasize it enough. And this sold me last week. We weren't even going out to do this. We were going out to test some other rigging that I had made. And while we were sailing in, I just decided to do this. And I told Tim, I was like, look, I said, we got to get you on board with what we're doing here. So we'll move on here. This is that same sail. This is a 2017 mainsail that we took to Kansas. It won in 2018, and like I said, he uses it every Wednesday night for the past, however long, 4 years. So it's got at least 50 to 70 days on it, and this is still what it looks like. It's crazy. It blew me away. So we're going to reference. I know some of you might have the carbon rig. I just want you to reference here. I'm showing you the aluminum rig, right around 2416 on the tension, right? Fairly even curve, right? So this is what we set up for. And the C-Tech mast. This is the boat. This is actually on 173. We borrowed John's boat and took Tim's brand new main out for the first time. And if you notice, a fairly similar profile, if you will. I'll go back and forth here. You can see this, the aluminum versus the carbon. The carbon's just slightly straighter up in the top, but surprisingly, the bottom is quite similar. It's not nearly as different as a lot of people are led to believe, or I led myself to believe, until I finally started seeing it. So just a quick reference there. Okay. So this, like I said, we borrowed John's boat. I didn't want to go crazy, changing everything. So we left the dock and we were at 30 and 6. I told you that about that. Because he has Doyle sails normally. So like I said, I didn't want to change it. But what I did do was I just started grinding on the lowers, and I got it to about 30-15 before, we were kind of done for the day. And we kind of started getting a nicer shape on this. It was quite flat to begin with, obviously, because at 30 and 6, the 6, there was virtually no load on the lowers whatsoever. So the mast could go and do whatever it wanted. I don't think we're not getting a lot of side sag, which we used to do on the Melges 24. We try to get side sag quite a bit. These boats, I don't think we're gaining that much by letting off the lowers because they're located so far aft. So just
Steve,
some.
still a question.
Yep.
The pictures you're showing is our standard Ballinger spar aluminum, and then the C-Tech rig.
Correct.
Okay, so the Forte rig responds different than the C-Tech, and we don't typically buy C-Tech anymore just because of import charges.
Yep.
And
Yeah, there was only 3 or 4 maybe C-Techs, or that many.
I
maybe
think there
not.
was more than that. I think they bought 10 right off the bat.
Oh, okay.
But the ones that we go through now with Forte as a D-shaped form,
Okay.
so it's going to give you a little bit more side sag But not much just because carbon's so stiff. So,
Mhm. Right, and so, yeah, this was obviously a round section with just the track on the back. And so, yeah, that's probably why it's, a little bit stiffer up top versus the D section aluminum. Everybody knows that these are quite noodly, but it's a good tuning tool. So if you have the Forte, I don't have pictures of that. I don't know if Dave Kraus, he's the only other carbon rig that's in our neck of the woods. I'm not sure what she has, but I'll have to find out. He does have a sale just like this from us. So we'll have to get with him and try to find out what it looks like for those of you who have the Forte rig.
Steve, I believe Mike Myers also has a carbon rig.
Where's that?
Mike Myers has the Forte rig, but they're still sailing sales on that rig that were originally designed for the aluminum rig. So,
That's not fast.
Yeah. I know, talking with Bruce out in California, I think there was no difference between this sale and the other sale that we made for Dave Kraus. We talked about maybe changing the luff curve a little bit, but I think in the end we didn't. And I think it looks pretty good. I think he's been pretty happy with it. So then again, we'll have to find out which rig he has, I guess. So we'll move on real quick. I'm gonna run out of time here. We're gonna start with the jib. Things to look for: a nice even foot shape. Kind of a decent curve. What we don't want is a big wrinkle or the foot flapping or to have to over round. And I'm going to show you a picture here in a second of what it looks when it's over round, especially on the side with the pole. It's really easy to see over there. But it should have a smooth shape. You could adjust your cars for that. As a driver, I'm basically only looking at this. So you kind of get a reference and an idea. The crew, I should say, should be looking up here, whereas the driver should only be looking here, and then obviously the telltales above that. But trimmers and crew should always be looking up here. These telltales, and I cannot impart this enough to you guys, they have to be flying. They have to be flying. If there's one thing you leave tonight with, it's make the leech telltales on the jib fly. You cannot have them stalled, because all that does is it kills all the airflow on the backside of the main. If you get them to stall every once in a while, that's okay. That means you're on the verge of being sheeted tightly and right. But for the most part, I see a lot of people sailing around with these leech telltales just Velcro to the backside of the sail. And I'm telling you guys, it's killing you. You can't let that happen. Obviously you can change the leads like we talked about to get more round or less round. And that's also changing your leech profile. You want a smooth, constant profile. You don't want it hooked one way or, open totally. That's kind of generic stuff. We all know that. Here we go, looking at the foot of sail. So same sails, same boat, same day. Might be the same leg of the race, actually. Trees Decker here has her sail just slightly undersheeted, or the car is too far forward. And you can see here that obviously the pole kind of gives you a good heads up that sail is under trimmed, or it's just has a improper car position. Here we go. On my boat, you can tell it's almost too blocked. And I got that just ever so slight wrinkle. We're hiking, trying to keep the boat flat and fast. This is, like I said, this is what I look at when I'm driving. This is my reference point. If the sheet is out a little bit and this is a little too full, I'll ask for a click or two in on the jib. And then once that happens, then I'll look up maybe and look at the leech telltale. But like I said, for the most part, that's the trimmer's job. The driver needs to be just kind of referencing his foot here, and obviously the telltales as he's driving. You can see by having this sail flatter, this entry is finer, whereas Trees has a much fuller, rounder sail, so the leech is probably hooked. And what that does is that pushes all that sail shape up front and you can see where it's just backwinded for the most part on the headstay. What controls that is your luff curve on your sail and your sag of your headstay, okay? So those two things need to work in unison. The headstay sag is the amount, so the amount of fullness is controlled by the amount of headstay, or I'm sorry, luff curve in your sail and how it relates to that wire headstay, okay? More sag equals a fuller sail, we all know that, but there are certain limits, right? We don't want to go too much because then the leech can become hooked and start coming to weather, stalling your telltales. This sail doesn't have it. It's flowing nice and open, nice open slot here. The wind is meant to be accelerated through this slot, right? Because we're trying to usher this air on the front side of the jib over to the back side, you know, creating this exhaust, if you will, to speed the air up over the backside of the main. Those are all good things. Those are all the things that we want, right? We want efficiencies. This goes all the way back to the basics, okay? It's all efficiencies that we're working with. Nice, you know, smooth sail shape, optimal sag, 3 to 6 inches. I wouldn't say you want to be a whole lot tighter than that. And as a reference, I would call this, I think to my eye, I would call that 4 inches. So I'm on the tighter side of that, just so you know. But if we go too much, we're not going to want that unless it's really light and we're trying to fight through a lot of chop, because that's going to fill this sail out a little bit. Overall sail shapes, it's controlled by your sheet tension and lead angle. You all know that. But once again, you guys, you have to keep these telltales flowing, okay? So the luff curve of the sail we talked about, this is drawn on the floor. So this is a fanned luff curve. Sails have broad seaming in all the seams, whether it be a radial or a crosscut, doesn't matter. They all have shape. And then primarily the very front edge of the sail is controlled by this luff curve. So when we fan the sail, essentially we're taking all the shape out of these broad seams, whether it be radial or not, okay? And so this is meant to somewhat mirror what the headstay would look like, okay? In a perfect world. If you can see this line right here drawn on the floor, that's actually the luff curve of a Doyle sail. So you can see how much more positive it is because most of their sail shaping comes from that. So that you can see that extra material would all be up in front here. Those are both fanned luff curves. What happens when the headstay sags too much? You can see here, this is, oh gosh, I don't know, 8 to 10 inches maybe. It's a lot. But what happened here is it was super windy that night. Did I write it on here? I don't know, Emily, this is your boat. I think it was like probably 15 to 18, maybe 20. It doesn't look like it on the water, but it's flat water. So the main was ragging. So you can see here, the battens are inside out. So the main was flogging the whole time. So when that's happening, obviously there's nothing holding this headstay taut. And so you can actually see the mast bending right here a little bit. From here over, it's bending to leeward, which again is shortening the distance between the hounds and the deck. And when the hounds and the deck get closer together, what happens? This wire here all of a sudden becomes longer and it starts sagging, the pressure of the sail. So it causes the sail to be over trimmed a little bit. You can see how full it is because of all that headstay sag. So you got to do the right things to try to keep, you know, your headstay in check, because we don't have a backstay, right? So it's imperative that we keep this sail on the proper side of inversion as long as we can until you can't anymore, which kind of was at this point. So
you have options in this situation is if you, like you're saying, if you throw too much vang on, you're still shortening the hounds.
correct.
So really what you're doing is you're lowering your traveler as far as you possibly can and try to keep your main sheet on. And that may keep your hounds a little bit further apart until you can't handle it anymore, and then you got to bear it off.
Mhm.
Same type of thing is that, especially we've learned in Lake Michigan where you got bigger chop and so forth, is you got to really open that slot, and the jib will take you wherever it wants to go. So you got to go ahead and you got to move your car back and twist off that top a lot.
Yep.
So
To a certain degree. And so you can't, I'm a firm believer in not moving a car too far back because the leech is the most important part of the sail, leech tension, if you will. And so if you do slide that car too far aft, this sail from here up is going to be inside out, and we don't want that either. We want to keep the leech somewhat flowing because you have to have an exit, a clean exit. So what I would do is probably leave. I wouldn't slide the car too far back. I would slide it back, yes, but not too far. And then maybe just crack the sheet a bit. Okay, so that way I can keep my leech taut, but still have the sail slightly further from the boat. It's a little bit counterintuitive. J24s do it with the Genoas when it gets really windy in order to open that slot up so you don't backwind the main and you actually ease the sheet. And it's quite a bit. I mean, you're doing 6 inches at a time. It's a lot. We're not going to do it obviously that much with this, but it's kind of a similar type thing. We're going to keep, the J70s are the same way. We're going to keep a little bit of leech tension on, and then maybe just crack the sheet a hair to help ease the load of the sail. But the biggest thing you got to take away is that if this headstay sags, we're losing everything. If the main inverts and the headstay sags, we're going sideways, we're heeling over, and we're not going forward nearly what we should be. So just things to keep in mind. Every time that, like I said, every time this sags, it closes that slot. So here you can see.
From the entire amount of things that we actually adjust the track on our jib is standardly when that boat was built, we're always in the fourth hole back for standard sailing with moderate winds. And if winds get heavy and chop and you typically would bring it one back. So you're 5 holes back. We didn't drill any extra holes in the track. And the only time if it's super light winds with chop, then it goes 3 holes back and it gives you a fuller jib to be able to power through the waves. And
don't be afraid to drill holes. Don't drill out your screws. Don't be afraid to drill holes. I've actually put, I think, 2 in between each, I want to say. And then I took a Dremel tool and I scribed numbers in alongside on the track, not on the deck, but on the track itself. And so, yeah, same thing. But the standard holes, yes, 1 on either side of that is going to be a lot. So if you have some in between, that's great. But you're not going to go more than probably 1 on either side of what you feel is optimal. Because what happens is, like you can see here, when you have too much headstay sag and if that car is still forward, it's going to hook this leech dramatically, right? And what's going to happen is it's just going to backwind into this main. The straight headstay pulls all the sail area that's built in the sail and holds it up front. If we let it sag, we let all that sail material migrate aft. And when it migrates aft, it causes the leech to hook, to weather, right? So here, the straight headstay, open leech, and then you can adjust your car. Straight entry, very little power, good for pointing because you can see the air entering this is much easier than coming over here and trying to make a hard right turn, left turn, whatever you want to call it, Clyde, around the front of the sail when it's too round. So it's not good for pointing. It is. It's good. It makes it easier to drive because you have a much wider groove, whereas this is real narrow. So the telltales are going to go crazy, one side or the other. This is a knife's edge, and so there you can kind of see visually what it's doing between letting it sag and not letting it. So only a couple left here, almost done. Some actual sails here. So this was the first sale. Okay, so this is the sale that I got with the boat. I believe it's a 2017 Doyle jib, and looks good here, right? Car position. You can tell the foot has a nice kind of smooth curve to it. You know, the luff is slightly loose because I want to keep my entry fine and not too round like we were talking about. Here you can see, you know, with the telltales just slightly lifting on the inside, about perfect, right? Leech telltales are flying, but if we start pulling that sheet in anymore, you can see that we're going to start choking this slot down a little bit. You know, pulling that sheet in, nice and round, but then it goes straight, and then it's real critical to not get this leech hooked. Okay, to have that lead position, so that your leech stays somewhat parallel with the center line of the boat. Okay. So here you can see same thing, different sail. Nice smooth shape. The difference here being, you know, you can tell the foot is nice and has nice curvature. The difference here, that the leech is slightly more open, okay? You can tell by this draft stripe. See how that exit is nice and straight? This exit comes and hooks a little bit to weather here, okay? Sail's much fuller, and then the sail has to go somewhere, so it starts connecting these 2 points between the clew and the head, and when it does, it causes this to pull in a straight line, which causes the leech to hook a little bit. This sail we designed much more open up top, so we can sheet this sail very, very hard and still, I won't say never, because we can obviously stall this telltale, but we can sheet it much, much harder. Probably 2 clicks harder than you think. And this telltale still flies because this leech is nice and straight and open. Optimal pointing, obviously, with the nice fine entry. You know, the sail just still powerful enough, but you can tell, looks like the head stay sag is similar, not far off, right? Between the 2 sails, so. All right. Working on an hour here. So we'll finish it up with takeaways. You guys can go back and watch this. Just a whole lot of me talking, but you'll go back and you can narrate it yourself. How's that? Just keep these things in mind. And that's that when the mast bends, your sail gets flatter. Okay, so that's fine. That's generic. However, if your mainsail gets too flat, or it starts going inside out and ragging and you're having those overbend wrinkles, you need to straighten the mast. So when you straighten the mast, it does what? Sail gets fuller, right? If it bends, it gets flatter. We straighten it, it's going to get fuller. So don't be afraid to play a little bit with, like I said, the lowers. The lowers are what straighten the mast, or lay off on the boom vang, or look at the main sheet bridle system, how you might be able to change that. The slot between the main and the jib must be smooth, consistent, and open. Okay, it can't be closed. You can't have that jib pointed back towards the mainsail. That's not what we want. Head stay sag provides power, but it leads to a stalled leech. So yes, you can round out your sail and make it nice and full, but there are other things that are going to happen. And so you've got to be careful that you don't stall the leech of the jib. Eliminate your head stay sag by straightening the mast. That's the same thing. Pulling on the lowers, right? That's going to help do that. The sails are different. The Doyles versus the Ullmans. I don't know what else there is out there. I don't know. I know D-Ball had a sail out there for a while. Might be some Norse. But I can tell you that between the Doyles and the Ullmans, they're dramatically different. Like I showed you, the luff curves. The Ullman sail has broad seaming in it with less luff curve, whereas the Doyle sails have less broad seaming and more luff curve. So they fly entirely differently. And Tack and I actually in 2017, given a little chalk talk afterwards, is when we started kind of finally realizing, I think, that we were giving 2 totally opposite pieces of advice. So because of the different sails. But it was interesting to find out. So now that we know that, I'm going to leave you with this again. You guys, your trimmers, you have to keep those leech tails on the jib flying. It's imperative. You have to do that. Skipper, remind your crews, remind your skippers. Okay, those leech tails must be flying. So with that, are there any other questions?
Well, Steve, I would agree with you on the differences between almond sails and Boston sails are dramatically different between flatter or fuller. Since I've owned both, and I actually own UK right now as well.
Okay,
And sort of a in between all the sails.
gotcha.
Very interesting to see the different dynamics. So I mean, my old almonds that I have very strong battens in them. So if there's light winds, really hard to pop through. The Bostons, if you sneezed at them, they would fall through. So it was, I mean, totally, you really have to learn your sails. I really like the advice about the jib telltales to keep them flying, because as you said, the drivers can't really see those. So it's good to give that advice to our trimmers. So,
And I'm telling you, you go and you sail next to somebody and you look at their telltales not flying, and it's going to drive you mad. It really will. And everybody, I won't say all the boats, but most of the boats that sail around us, they're doing that. And I cringe. And I try to yell at some people. I try not to yell at some people, others, but yeah, you talked about the sails, and a lot of you have the Doyle sails. And like I said, that's the ones that came with my boat. Like I said, the first thing I did was change the battens. Most of you have what you talk about is a very knuckle forward sail shape with your Doyle sails, and then a very straight exit, which is good, or can be. But the draft forward thing, I never was a fan of. And so ever since I saw them, I knew I had to change something. And so this was my remedy, was making just newer battens to get this kind of what I would call a more normal sail shape. And I don't hate this sail. I'll tell you what, guys. Like I said, I won the first 2 regattas with it. I didn't hate it, but I do like my new one a lot better. So,
Steve, I
and
have a
then,
question.
yep.
Any comments on Spinnaker?
So I didn't want to touch on Spinnaker. We're going to be here way too long. Obviously, we took long enough at just the main and jib and rig. So we're going to do another one for Spinnaker and downwind. How's that?
All right, looking forward to it. Absolutely
Okay.
looking forward to it. Yep.
Yes. So we'll just do a whole downwind, because I mean, obviously I can talk for hours. I don't want to, but I've done a lot over the past couple of years, and learned a lot myself. So it's been quite interesting. So we'll just do a whole separate presentation for downwind and Spinnakers, if that's all right with you guys.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay.
Steve, what about the jib leech tension, that core? I don't know how the almonds are set up, but there's sort of a strap on the Boston Doyles.
Yeah, the leech cords, they shouldn't matter too much. They're just stopping it from flogging.
Okay.
So what happens is this is called leech hollow, and we design it in the sail. The only thing with the U20 jib that constrains us is a mid girth. So the girth up here is the only thing that limits our sail. Otherwise, we can make it as straight as we want. However, we don't like to do that, because anything you pull in a straight line, it's going to flap. And so we put leech cord in the sail. You can see it here, and here it is dangling, just in a plastic V cleat. Big boats have Velcro pockets. But yeah, it's just to keep it from fluttering, because if you don't draw enough leech hollow in between each batten, the leech it gets a negative pressure and it will start flapping. So it's the least important. And this sail has quite a bit of leech hollow, so there's really not a lot of need to pull the leech cord. But you can tell when there is a little bit of tension on it, and you're pulling this into a straight line, or you're trying to, that what you're doing is you're pulling that cord which is on the very back edge of the sail. And that tension is keeping it from fluttering.
Okay.
So older sails are going to flutter more, obviously,
Mhm, mhm.
because they've worn away and they stretched, and it's bound to happen. I think who was it? Somebody asked a question about that. Oh, the draft position on the jib, John. New versus an old sail. So a new sail, obviously, you pull it out of the bag. You don't have to pull the leech cord on, probably, because the leech is nice and taut, and it's the shape that it's supposed to be. But as sails get older and they soften and they loosen and they stretch, you'll notice you start putting on leech cord, and that's just for that reason. The sail everything's changed where it was originally, and so you just gotta contain the fluttering.
Steve, you answered my question too as well. It was because half the people in our fleet really, in high winds, put on a lot of boom vang.
Boom
They
vang.
just pull on boom vang, and then
It's
one
traditional. It's traditional. That's
Yeah.
what we all do on all the boats, right? I mean,
One
IOR
guy-
boats had the boom vang go into a winch back in the day.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's normally what you would do. However, this boat is a different animal, so you have to really be careful with it.
Yeah.
What do we learn with our boat is if you put too much boom bang in, you go downwind and chop.
Break it
Boom.
Yeah, boom is pretty much the answer.
Mhm.
So my aluminum rig's 21 years old and still standing. So
Yeah, I'm sure mine's the original one too, and I wouldn't mind trading it for a carbon one, but I'll tell you, it's still going. So
Steve, hey, it's Clay. I'm looking at that picture there with that jib, and does that jib actually have battens? With that amount of hollow, I can't even imagine why it would need to.
So I feel the same way. However, like I said, the limiting factor is that it has a really narrow girth in the class rule, and so you're gonna have that no matter what. The only other limiting factor is there's a minimum distance from clew and a minimum distance from head, or I'm sorry, they're both from clew. There's a minimum distance for the batten ends. And so what we've done actually is I've moved the battens further apart so that I can now get my mid girth into a hollow. So essentially the sail can be bigger, but you don't want to go too much straighter. I think because the leech will go away too soon and it will become too hooked, just for that reason. Like I said, we're pulling this curve into a straight line, which makes it nice and straight. If you have this with less leech hollow and it's more of a straight line between the 2 points and you pull it tight, it's going to start hooking to weather more. It has no choice but to, fall victim to physics and
Yeah.
start,
No,
going
that's
the wrong
cool.
way.
I was probably ignoring some of the class rules around girth and stuff. So that was but that's a great explanation. Thanks.
Yeah. So I did quite a bit of work on the latest sales that we have, or that Ullman has, because of my previous history with them. So I did quite a bit of work on the mains and the jibs, and some on the spinnakers, to try to refine them a little bit and get them closer to where they need to be, and what I feel is better. So
Cool.
Is that across all Ullman lofts, Steve, or just California?
just Newport Beach builds them, I believe. Yeah. They're the only ones with the designs.
Okay.
So yeah.
I just got a new set of Ullmans for my Forte rig from
Okay.
Newport. So really worked out. That shape looks just like your photos. It's much better than the sails I had before.
Yeah, well, good.
So Steve, one more question about the main sheet bridle and the effect of moving that center of effort forward like 9 inches and the effect it has on the sail shape. What do you attribute to that? Because that kind of blows my mind. So I'm not saying that I don't believe it, but I'm trying to understand why that happens. Why do you think that happens with that positive effect of just moving that center of effort on the bridle forward?
So it's pretty clever actually, because like we said, we know that the boom is it's a very short distance up from the mast butt. Okay, so there's not a lot of leverage, but the rigs are spindly. We all know that, right?
Yeah.
And so literally that chain, you can see the angle of deflection, right? So when I pull this main sheet on harder, it's going to slightly nullify the effect of the boom going forward into the rig, right? Because the traditional one, and I don't know, okay, can you see that now? The aft bail. So you can see how much further back that's located from the Traveler.
Yeah.
So when this block was back here, because it's the one going first to the main sheet ratchet block, and then it goes down to the Traveler block. So it's taking this entire lead and pulling it that far back, that's pushing the boom that much further forward. And it's, I don't, without putting a load cell or a tension gauge on it, I don't know how much it is. But what I do know is that it went from this to this, literally in just that slight change. And like I said, the one that I built, I can go in between. I can go anywhere I want with that, just by changing the length of these two splices. And I do it in between races, like I said.
Hmm.
I mean, you can't argue with this. I mean,
But copy that. You can see that picture there where you can see it's basically pulling, it's pulling the rig backwards. It looks like the two bales were set to center right above the Traveler, which was probably not a great idea. And we're pulling it slightly aft, it's actually had a positive effect on it.
Yeah, and it's going to slightly change with the amount of rake that you have in the boat, but I think we should all be sailing around with maximum rake. And so that's going to, drive these back a little bit further. So first time I looked at it, I just decided, you know what? I said, I'd rather, and I learned this with the J70s a little bit. I won't tell you what I did, but I figured out where that strap was on the boom made a big difference. And sure enough, that's the effect right there. That's cause and effect. And so this is the setup that I have on my boat. This is just when I first built it. I took a picture real quick. But like I said, we ended up with this on Tim's. I wouldn't suggest doing this and having it all on that forward bail because there are times that you're not going to want that. But like I said, if you can come back to you don't want the block to float necessarily. I don't believe. I would rather have it fixed and have control over which way I go with it. If you just let it float, it's going to end up right here in the middle somewhere, depending on how long or short the strop is that you have. And anything that it does, it's still going to be aft of the Traveler. Yeah. And that's not what I want. So, and I don't think we're pulling on this hard enough to rip the fitting off the mast. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that we're okay. But in a perfect world, like I said, I have it on both, and all I do is pull one shorter and let the other one go. So one or the other. So.
Cool.
There's some other tricks that we're working on, but they're unrelated to this. But this was one of the first ones that I came up with. Was kind of a cheap and easy, just makes a huge difference. I told John Pescatris this the other day. I said it's going to blow you away, and because that's what it did to me. As soon as I saw that, I was like, holy cow! I mean, because this looks ideal, to me, and it's like, man, that's what I want. So.
Well, Steve, the nice part about all of this is, number one, is it's a basic thing that you're showing there. Nobody's suggesting putting high wind kits, and nobody's suggesting putting a backstay on it. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
21 years of doing this, and yet, go through this stuff, still learning little tweaks and everything, which makes it so beneficial, and really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Good. And have the tendency to not have the boom vang on, which might save some people.
Absolutely.
Whether you forget to have it on at the weather mark or just have it not on for tuning purposes, but it's a dramatic difference. So the biggest thing is
at many boat shows, we went ahead and we would demonstrate what that boom vang could do on the Ultimate 20, just sitting there inside the show, and what the dramatic change it can do to that mast.
Yeah.
And you understand what it would do when it's under load with actual having wind on it at the same time.
Hmm.
So it's not a surprise that we've lost some mass over our time. So
Yeah. Yeah. So just everybody keep this in mind. And then if I could draw a jib and a leech tail, those would be the two biggest takeaways, I would think, for everybody. So hopefully that made sense to everyone, and just a whole lot of talking, but hopefully you got some stuff from it.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Appreciate it.
Great presentation. Terrific.
Good. No problem, you guys.
Thanks, Steve.
great
Steve,
seeing
I'll
you.
work with you to get the presentation up on the website as well. So
Okay.
people have to know. That'd be-
Thanks,
Yeah.
Steve. Appreciate it a lot. Thanks.
No problem, everybody.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank
you. Thank you, Steve.
Great
Yeah.
job.
By the way, Steve, I think I have the orange spinnaker that you talked about in the photo.
Seriously, yeah, perhaps.
that one
yeah.
should be signed and then
I hope you
put on
don't
a
use it
frame.
still.
It's on number 7. It was the original one.
Okay, yeah, I think that sounds familiar. That does, yeah. If it's orange, I couldn't imagine there was too many. I think I want to say we made another one. We might have made 2. Now that I think back, I don't know. I want to say we made another one because, and I forget why, but there's a good chance actually there was 2 of them, and it was just for that purpose though, because of photos. So kind of funny.
That's good. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. It's been
No
great.
problem, you guys.
Thanks.